America, bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh live from Studio West, about to return to the Commonwealth next week, where Governor Glenn Youngkin will continue a very good run as the Commonwealth's new governor. Good morning, Governor Youngkin. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. It's great to have your radio audience in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are cooking. There's a lot of great stuff happening, and I'm looking forward to today. You know, today we're doing a groundbreaking for the Lego Group as they start construction of their only U.S. manufacturing facility in Virginia, $1 billion, 1,700 jobs. It is a great step for the Commonwealth.
That is a big deal. 1,700, those are going to be good jobs working for Lego. And the demand isn't going down anywhere. If I'm judging by my grandchildren, the demand is going to be very high for a long time. Governor, I want to begin by asking you, I don't know the answer to this. Litigators rarely ask questions they don't know. But I assume you have been to the People's Republic of China a few times because of your leadership of the Carlyle Group, at least a few times. Am I right?
I have been there, and I tell you, during the time that I was at Carlyle and today, it has changed a lot. And you know, you see just the imperialistic economic view they're taking around the world, and on top of that, their aggressive military actions towards Taiwan. And it's why I was so pleased that we were able to pass legislation on a bipartisan basis to protect our agriculture from acquisition by entities owned by the Chinese Communist Party. We were able to ban TikTok and WeChat. And listen, at the end of the day, I'm just going to make sure that Virginia isn't using taxpayer money in order to facilitate gains by companies that are benefiting the Chinese Communist Party.
Now, Governor Youngkin, you have done a very unusual thing. You brought a lot of talented people to Richmond with you. You did the brain trust thing that FDR did at the start of the New Deal. You brought a bunch of talented people. Have you stood up a group to look at the consequences to the Commonwealth in the event of a world crisis with China, the sort that would follow an invasion of Taiwan, which would mean rapid and disruptive decoupling and indeed confrontation with China to the United States?
Well, we have gone through an extensive effort to see what would happen if we ended up with Chinese supplies that were interrupted. We've gone through an effort to make sure that we understand what would happen if the international financial systems came under huge duress and what that would mean for Virginia. And, you know, the good things about our Commonwealth are, one, we have the strongest financial condition that we have had ever, with huge reserves, and we're running a $3.6 billion surplus on top of having cut $4 billion in taxes and given rebates last year. And so, you know, the key here is that we have a strong financial balance sheet. We have a strong set of receipts and companies here that are driving jobs in the economy. And while our global economy, the United States and China, are very intertwined, you know, the idea that we could have a massive interruption to that, which will reverberate around the world and will be felt, I think Virginia is very well positioned should that happen.
Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that. I don't think many governors have thought that through, but we're kind of 1913, 1914 world right now. So I originally asked you to come on, and now I want to turn to it. If that happens, we're going to have to surge shipbuilding. The largest shipyard in the United States is in Virginia, Newport News. Not many people know that. That's where they build the Ford class. But you're like shipbuilding central. How are you preparing to surge shipbuilding in the event that this world crisis actually accelerates the need for our Navy's upgrade immediately?
Well, at the heart of it is workforce. And one of the biggest constraints in overall construction activity at Newport News Shipbuilding, which you're right, is the largest shipbuilder in the United States and supplies our Navy with submarines and aircraft carriers and other critical military weapon systems. Biggest issue we have is workforce, and that's why we have been doubling down on building the workforce of the future. I was just at the apprenticeship school graduation a few weeks back, which was the largest class that has graduated from the Newport News Shipbuilding Apprenticeship School. These are the future shipbuilder leaders in America. But this is one of our giant challenges. We also have supply chain challenges that they're dealing with. And at the end of the day, we need to build our capacity across America, and particularly in Newport News. And it starts with people. And that's why we're making such a huge investment in the Commonwealth in unlocking the potential of Virginians to play a part in this enormously important industry. One of the things that I'm really proud of is we recently cut a ribbon on a new advanced welding training center that feeds the Navy in Danville. We've now started to merge the lines between high school and community colleges with apprenticeships and credentialing for these most important trades. And of course, we're recruiting like crazy. We just passed a great bill that I signed that took 85 job categorizations in Virginia and gave them universal licensing. If you've got a license in another state and so many of the trades, come to Virginia and you can go to work right away.
Governor, this matters so much because industrial capacity is always what matters in a world crisis. We used to have it. I'm not sure we have it anymore. Do you think Newport News and the surrounding shipyard, you're preparing the people to go to work there, and that's fabulous. I didn't know about that. But can the shipyard expand quickly if you have to?
Well, there are real challenges, and let's just be clear. They have full backlogs for years and years to come, and yet they're behind, and they're behind for all the reasons that manufacturing has struggled over the last number of years: supply chains and workforce. And so this is why our focus from the Virginia standpoint is to drive innovation and to drive workforce. And there's super management at Newport News Shipbuilding. I'm deeply, deeply impressed with the leadership there in order to carry on this legacy, which has been in the heart of our national defense since the very first naval deployments.
Now, we have an infrastructure bill and we have the CHIPS Act. Has any of that money flowed into Virginia for related industries that would help with the shipbuilding surge or chip surge? Because you're going to Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. Very smart move. I hope you get Taiwan Semiconductor to build something in the Commonwealth. But are you laying out not an industrial policy, that's got bad connotations, but thinking ahead with some experts on what happens if the shoe drops?
Well, first of all, Hugh, this is all the entire effort behind the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bills, aside from being chocked full of a whole bunch of extraneous stuff that was driving a political agenda. But there's a real focus on reshoring the supply chains for critical industries in America. And Virginia started with the pharmaceutical industry. And so our pharmaceutical cluster, which has really been at the heart of bringing home critical active ingredients in the pharmaceutical chain to Virginia out of China, has been critical. We now are very focused on bringing capabilities from our semiconductor industry to Virginia, and we have seen movement across the country, and that's one of the reasons why I'm going to Taiwan next week, is to make sure that we are playing the kind of role that Virginia should play with our extraordinary universities and research capabilities. And on top of that, this workforce. I mean, we have the home to many of their customers in the defense industrial establishment. Micron is here, but we can expand beyond that. And I'm excited about having a chance both in Taiwan and Japan and Korea.
Now, your friend, former governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, and your friend, current governor of Ohio, won the CHIPS first round by getting Intel to build in Arizona and Ohio. Have you talked with them about how you get Taiwan Semiconductor to come to Virginia? Because it makes a lot of sense. It's got water and people and universities and a governor who's open to business. I mean, have you talked to them about how to land such a investment?
You bet we have. And I think Virginia has an extraordinary offering. And so, yeah, I have done the work to make sure that Virginia is going to be best positioned to attract this next round of investment. And we should be attracting this next round of investment. We've seen it in the pharmaceutical industry. We're seeing it really aggregate around the semiconductor industry, particularly around the supply chains for semiconductors, the research and development into semiconductors and all material sciences associated with it. But on top of that, the ability to scale fast with the kind of workforce people want. Virginia is incredibly well located. One of the great aspects of Virginia is with our port, which is we're in the middle of a $1.8 billion expansion effort at our port. We were rated the most efficient port in America last year, and it will be the deepest and the widest when we finish this effort on the East Coast. And so This is part of why we're seeing so much interest in Virginia from companies around the world and around the United States, but particularly in this critical sector that is going to be the future of America's national security, I believe, in these key industries.
I think you were right. That's why I'm glad you were the governor. Governor Glenn Youngkin, thank you. Safe travels to Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. Look forward to getting a debriefing from you when you return. Thank you, Governor Glenn Youngkin. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. It's Hugh Hewitt. Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation, colleague at Carlyle Group, or former colleague at the Carlyle Group with Governor Youngkin, who began the hour. Good morning, Admiral. Did you, in fact, cross paths with Governor Youngkin when he was still at Carlyle?
Oh, I did. I worked for him. He was co-CEO at that time with another fellow named Hugh Lee. I enjoyed working with Glenn Youngkin. We talked a lot about cyber and cybersecurity, for example. And I think he is someone who has immense character and cares about the country and is a very high-quality individual.
Well, what we were talking about, he's about to go off to Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, try and bring back some business. But I also asked him about, has he prepared the state for a world crisis with China? In other words, what would happen in Virginia with the largest shipbuilding yard in the world for the United States Navy and surge capacity if that world crisis tips over? And I want to ask you the same thing. Do you think Americans are thinking seriously at every level about what happens if the dress rehearsals for the invasion of Taiwan, the second of which has just finished, wrapped up, second in 2 months, 10 months, becomes the real deal? What would happen in the United States?
If China decided, and I don't think they will, so we can come back to our views of timeline here, but let's park timeline, whether it's 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. Let's park that. So let's just say China decides to invade Taiwan. You are correct. They have shown us kind of two views of how they might approach it. Clearly, it includes a blockade. It includes long-range missile strikes, ballistic missile strikes, and it includes a high degree of cyber activity. So now we've seen all that, tracks with the war plans we've had. I think if the United States saw those events, my belief is we would work aggressively to defend Taiwan. I think we'd start by giving them a great deal more capacity than we have flowed in. And as you know, Hugh, PAC Fleet and Indo-Pacific Command practice this, game it, think about it every minute. If your question is what happens here on the home front, I think it would come as a big shock to Americans if there were a sudden precipitating event. Frankly, it would be a shock to me. I think this is 3 to 5 years away because I think the Chinese are more patient than perhaps others do. But we would be in shock. It would have a Pearl Harbor-like effect on us. It would cause some very hard decisions. And I think, no, we're not ready for a full-scale war with China, is the bottom line.
Should every governor do what Youngkin has done and basically study the what-ifs from the worst-case scenario, which it's the dress rehearsal that just wrapped up. The third one's the real deal, and it's happening in 3 months. And people assume we'll get some notice, but Europe had no notice in 1914, and we didn't have any notice of the Imperial Japanese fleet, though a few people did warn FDR. If it happened, do you think every governor ought to be studying what the consequences are? Because the supply chain disruptions from COVID would be minor compared to what would happen if China attacked Taiwan.
Yeah, I would hope that every governor allocates some degree of attention to the international scene. I think some states are better at that than others. And Glenn Youngkin, as you mentioned, not only biggest shipyard, but also the biggest naval base in the world at Norfolk Naval Station. So I think my home state of Florida probably thinks about that. I suspect the California governor thinks about this. I think other smaller states, perhaps those more in the interior of the country, have less appreciation for it. But I'll tell you, a good place to start for each of these governors is to request a briefing on the impact of that. And I'd start with my adjutant general, my senior state military two-star general typically who has plenty of pipe into the Pentagon and can arrange that kind of briefing. I think that would be prudent for any governor.
What about CEOs that do a bunch of business? I was just talking to Chairman Gallagher yesterday, and he just sat down with Tim Cook. And Apple is in a world of hurt. They can't get out of China, right? They can't. And so, have you been advising? We're not talking specifically about Apple now. Have you been advising any companies on how to prepare for what would be the consequences from a world crisis?
My role as a geopolitical expert and analyst is more along the lines of what are the chances that this could occur? What are the immediate tactical and operational effects? What is the likelihood of this happening? What are the timelines? Those are the kind of things that I'm particularly well positioned to talk about. I do not, as a general proposition, talk about the kind of business choices that you are articulating. I try and provide a sense of where the overall situation is going so that the business leaders, the people like Glenn Youngkin, when he was the CEO of the Carlyle Group, would be in a position to make those kind of business decisions. And by the way, I think you're absolutely correct. It's not just Apple. Many firms are very reliant on China for manufacturing, less so for services than for goods. And many of those businesses could find themselves in a very difficult position if a sudden, sharp conflict broke out. Again, I don't think that's likely. I know some believe it could happen in the immediate future. I'd say it's 3 to 5 years away at a minimum.
Now, Admiral, I chanced upon a name yesterday that I did not know, Newton D. Baker. Now, you normally know everything I don't know. Have you ever heard of Newton D. Baker? He was the Secretary of War during Wilson.
I do not immediately flash up with a mental picture of Newton D. Baker.
This is what surprised me. George Marshall said he was the best man he ever met. And think about everyone that George Marshall met, right?
Yeah.
So he was the Secretary of War during World War I, and for Wilson, he was mayor of Cleveland, almost got nominated in 1932. And while reading about him in the context of reading about the stand-up of the New Deal, FDR, and like Wilson before him, had to appoint people to oversee war production. I mean, it was a mess. It was a complete mess. Do you think it would be a mess again if we got into a conflict with China?
I think we would, as you say, would have to face a Pearl Harbor-like moment and mobilize the defense base. And we're seeing a mini version of what it might look like with the war in Ukraine, where we clearly are falling behind in delivering the really massive level of conventional firepower that the Ukrainians need. Here's the good news. The Ukrainians need very different things, very different military kit than we would need to deal with a China-Taiwan scenario. But the point is still the same. The defense industrial base, which is vast in this country, is not on a war footing, nor was it on December 6th, 1941. What I hope our opponents take away is that when we awaken that defense industrial base, it can move pretty damn quickly, and I think it would in this kind of scenario.
Now, Admiral, your timeline is 3 to 5 years, and I read 2034, and I thought it was pretty good, your novel of conflict with China, and I thought it was persuasive as to that. But 2 full-scale dress rehearsal invasions and President Macron of France going over there and not giving him a red light, basically saying, we're not in this, so badly that the French economic minister had to go to Bret Baier last night and said, we really didn't mean that. It's not the sort of stuff you need from the West to deter Xi, is it?
No, it's not. Again, let's put it in a historical context. It's a common argument to say, and look at Pearl Harbor. That came out of nowhere. No, it didn't. We looked at that possibility for conflict for well over a decade. We looked at it in the war colleges. We looked at it in what are the equivalents of the combatant commands in those days. That's happening now. And similarly, we didn't really see a bolt out of the blue. Tactically, we did, certainly, the attack on Pearl Harbor itself. but the movement of Japan was pretty clear to us. So I think those signals are out there. And I think we're in that kind of period right now. And again, just like with Japan, it took a decade and more before the sudden strike came. I'm unpersuaded that we are trending toward a sudden strike right now.
Why are you that way, Admiral? When he's running these dress rehearsals, why are you still on the, I don't want to call it optimistic. You're a realist. You're not an optimist, but you're not an alarmist. Why not?
I'll give you three reasons. One is President Xi's personality. Study his life. Take a look at him. There's nothing in it to suggest that he would make a sudden, rash, lunge at the ball movement the way that Putin did. Xi is someone who spent years of his life shoveling manure on a collective farm, reapplied again and again to get in the Chinese Communist Party. His father fell from grace. He is a thoughtful, longer-range thinker. So I think his personality is one factor. Secondly, I don't think China's ready, and they know it. And in 3 to 5 years, they'll be much further along with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the construction of the basic materials of war, the training and the exercises. And third and finally, to your point of two dress rehearsals, we simply ought to remember those were both conducted in response to meetings with the Speaker of the House. In one case, Pelosi, and the other case, McCarthy, of course. So I think those are important. We had to look at them. We had to vacuum up all the intelligence we can get. But we shouldn't, in my view, make a leap from that to, we're going to have a war in the next 6 months. I just don't see it.
So, Admiral, this is my last. I got to get this question in. This question, we've had a leak of national classified material. Nobody even recognized it at the Pentagon for 3 months. Do you think we will know? We will know, absolutely know, if China's going to do it?
We will never absolutely know, but the fact that the Pentagon missed what is, I think, going to turn out to be a kind of a gamer taking documents. I mean, there's a lot to unpackage here and fix, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to say, and therefore we're not going to be able to see China with our satellites, with our collection capabilities. We have pretty strong intelligence. I think we'll get more of a heads up, but hey, let's keep digging through this and figure out what we can do to prepare.
Boy, I hope Admiral Stav is right, but I'm going the other way. He's not even an alarmist, and I usually am not, but now I'm going the other way, 2 in a row. Makes me worried. Admiral Stav, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at StavridisJ, and follow me to the next segment with Senator Jim Talent coming right up. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Jim Talent, with Senator from Missouri, is with the Bipartisan Policy. Senator, welcome back. I got to ask you, I've been talking with Glenn Youngkin this morning and with Admiral Stav about what I sense is now the precipice of a world crisis because China has run 2 dress rehearsal invasions of Taiwan. Glenn Youngkin is preparing his state for it. Admiral Stav says 3 to 5 years. What does Jim Talent think?
3 things. First of all, it's been clear to anybody with a pulse for the last 10 years that the Chinese are preparing to do this. Reuniting with Taiwan is a core interest. In fact, it's the most important core interest for the Chinese. I served 8 years on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. That's a mouthful. It's a senior advisory commission to the Congress on all things China. And we assessed 2 years ago in our 2021 report that they were at or near an initial invasion capability. So there's no question they've wanted to do this. We have done little to prepare for it. In fact, for half of that, the last 10 years, we were operating under the defense sequester, okay? 2, Stav's view is similar to the Pentagon's view. You remember Admiral Davidson said that 2027 was the target date in his view. That's called the Davidson window by the Pentagon, and that's quite possible. I agree with what he said. We're living now on the margin of Xi Jinping's patience. That's what he said at the end of it. And 3, I do think we're going to enter a period of heightened risk in the Taiwanese presidential election. if Lai Ching-te, the current vice president and who will be the DPP candidate, if he wins, and it's going to be in January of next year, then I think we need to be very ready. And now, what is one more thing? We will see if they're going to do an invasion or a total blockade of Taiwan. We will see those forces massing. Okay, so we will have some warning. And Stavridis the admiral is absolutely correct about that.
Well, now I wonder whether or not we will, because they're sneaky like we're sneaky. I'm just curious about whether or not you think other governors and CEOs like Glenn Youngkin is doing for Virginia is planning on what will happen, or even trying to imagine. The economic consequences are devastating in America, to American markets, American manufacturing, our surge ability, the defense industrial base. If it happens, in tort law, and you know this, you've got to provide much protection depending upon the risks that you're facing. And right now, we are not providing the level of preparation given the risk we are facing. I don't think. Do you?
No, we're not. We're not ready. I'm not positive we could get ready, in the sense that we don't know the fog of war is going to be so great that it's hard to prepare. Now, businesses are deleveraging from China. I think the message got through a couple of years ago to most of the big businesses that they needed to diversify their supply chains. And the ones that I talked to, the business associations, et cetera, they're all trying to do that. I doubt many governors have done what Glenn Youngkin's done. Maybe they ought to. And supply chains are going to be a real problem. There's no question we're not going to be able to import from China. And what about raw materials? What about rare earth minerals?
When you look at the president in Ireland talking about the black and tans instead of the all black, which is maybe the worst faux pas you can make in the Republic of Ireland, to confuse a rugby team with the most hated, repressive British force in modern Republic of Irish history, the black and tans. Do you think Xi looks and says, it's never going to get better in terms of infirmity in the White House and lack of energy and responsiveness and pacifism in the ruling party than it is right now?
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned that I think it's hard to look at this administration and what they've done in Afghanistan with regard to the leak that we just saw, and think that we're going to go up against a well-planned and well-executed sort of response by the United States. Now, at the same time, I do think the resolution of the West in supporting Ukraine probably has impressed the Chinese. They are drawing lessons from that. And I fear that the lesson they're drawing is when they go, they're going to go big. And here's the thing. They're planning on the assumption that we're going to defend Taiwan. We may not even have the option of not defending Taiwan. There's a distinct possibility that they will attack us before we have a chance to try and interrupt what they're doing with a blockade or an invasion.
What would that look like? The carrier in the Pacific?
I think, as Admiral Stavridis said, cyber attacks, possibly going after the satellites to cutting off our command and communication, possibly trying to neutralize Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. There's also the scenario where they blockade and they dare us to shoot first. I think if it happens, what we'll see is Xi Jinping will at least try to set it up to give us an opportunity to take an off-ramp and let them do whatever they want to do. But if it looks like we're going to be resupplying Taiwan, or we're moving forces into range to interdict an invasion, they could attack directly with the missiles.
Even if we took the Munich option and they're getting hit with missiles, what do you think happens to the markets? 10 seconds, Jim Talent.
It's going to have an economic impact such as we have never seen. I agree. It's
everything.
Your suggestion.
It's everything. Jim Talent on Twitter. Thank you, Jim. I'm coming right back. America Bret Baier is next. Stay tuned. Baier, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning.
Now, you asked me last night what I thought of that interview. Now I get to ask you this morning, what did you think of that interview?
Well, the reason I asked you and Britt and Jessica, was because I clearly thought it was the finance minister walking that back, or at least trying to present that trip in a different way to an American audience. I think the words of Emmanuel Macron, not only in China, but to reporters afterwards, seemed to be pretty clear. And I think the finance minister was trying to make them a little bit more fuzzy. Listen, there is a shift happening. And whether you concede it or not, you're starting to see more and more countries make the trip to Beijing. And maybe equivocate a bit when it comes to Taiwan. The interesting thing about it is that they don't want to when it comes to Russia and Ukraine and that aggression because it's in their backyard.
And that is, you drew that out of him. I'm amazed that there is a willful blindness going on to where we are with Taiwan and China. I think we're on the brink of a world crisis. It's the second dress rehearsal in 10 months. Do many of your guests, do your executives, do your producers share that, my gosh, this might be 1940, 1941 stuff? And I just asked Glenn Youngkin at length, are we ready in Virginia? His answer is yes, we're studying that, but I don't think most Americans are ready for that.
No, definitely most Americans aren't, and we as a country aren't. I mean, there are all kinds of war games and simulations that say we're way behind on our ability to even help there, let alone how to respond. And I think that the administration has not been clear. I mean, I understand the ambiguity in the policy, but they've kind of taken it overboard with the president saying, yes, we're sending troops to Taiwan if China goes in, and then the White House walking that back every time. I think there's a real concern in the inner circles. I used to cover the Pentagon, and I still talk to a lot of those folks. And I think they think we're closer than we've been, but they're not sure it's imminent around the corner. But within a year.
Yeah. Admiral Stavridis keeps saying 3 to 5 years. He was on earlier today. I really respect the Admiral. He knows what he's talking about, former Allied Supreme Commander in NATO. But if it's not, the consequences to the United States, the consequences for Taiwan are terrible, but the consequences to our economy and to our security are even worse. And the possibility of going big is there, much more than actually Ukraine is, by far a lot. And so last night we ended up talking about Tim Scott. I trotted out the Axelrod theory, which is if you're going to change presidents, you look for the personal qualities that were missing in the previous one or the previous two. Tim Scott does seem to fill that box to me, which is humble, engaging, warm, friendly, open, man of faith. What do you think about the Axelrod theory and Tim Scott's lane? Is Vice President Pence already in that lane?
That's where I think the problem comes, in that there may be a number of people who fill that lane. And that will be the test. Obviously the former president is sucking up all the oxygen and all the poll numbers. But there's not a sense that that's locked in. There's a possibility that there is a tiredness, that there is a move on from the chaos kind of feel to it. But when we get to a debate, the first one in August, I think that's going to be a big moment to see who is the person who is not Trump that rises to the top.
Now, I've got to say, by the way, well played, Mr. Bond. Bret and the Fox News team landed the first debate again, and those of us on the outside, oh doggone it, those sons of guns got the. Are you starting already to figure this out? Because you don't even know how many people. I don't know how many people are going to be on the stage. Yeah,
no, we're praying that it's not as many. I'd love to have not two tiers as we did in Cleveland in 2015. But remember, that was a big debate. And if it has to be, it has to be. Ideally, you're 8 or fewer, and you have one stage, and you have more time. I think it'll be expanded from what we've done in the past as far as time-wise. And we'll come up with the RNC will provide the guidelines and the threshold, and we'll come up with the murder board to kind of go through. And as you well know, the biggest challenge is to be fair to everybody, number one, to be tough but fair, and to, let candidates have moments between each other. That's really what we're trying to get to.
Now, what's interesting to me, Bret, is you are the host of the most serious news show in America. That's a compliment. But you also have to get ready for a debate. Do you select a producer-director team early on and work with them daily, weekly? It's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it starts months in advance, and we'll start probably in earnest at the beginning of May. And yes, there'll be designated folks, and we have research folks, and we'll kind of lay out, buckets of topics and how we think the structure of the debate's going to go. The biggest question, as we just talked about, is how many and how you have to plan for it. But the main one we know will be in is the former president. And, he'll probably be center stage. And as you know, he's an X factor when it comes to debates.
There are some sorts of prosecutors out there. I don't know if Jack Smith is one of them, who would screw with the former president if he was had to do a debate. I mean, they just would. That's what prosecutors do. It's what Rudy used to do with the perp walks with Wall Street people. Has that crossed your mind yet, that you got to prepare for the judicial system run by Jack Smith, or in Georgia or in New York, screwing with your debate?
Yes. I mean, look, if Manhattan goes all the way to fruition, if it gets that far, you're talking about January. That's going to be right in the middle of New Hampshire, Iowa. So is it possible that something happens in August when this debate, the week of this debate, the day of this debate? Yes. And, that changes maybe some questioning, maybe, some element of it. I'm sure other candidates are going to take the line that we as a country can't afford to keep going through this. But right now, the electorate seems, Hugh, to be backing the former president and thinking he's being wrongly, persecuted.
Now, Brett, I want to close by telling about the leak story. The Washington Post has found the leaker before the FBI did. You think that's a story?
Yes. It's a big deal. And, they went through the gaming folks and the platform, but I do think so. I mean, you would hope that the FBI and the criminal system had their eyes on this person already because of the clues, but it seems like the Washington Post has tracked it down.
No, I'm just curious. I made a comment last night. What is the FBI doing? We have Chinese espionage all over the country. We've got gamers releasing classified documents that reveal methods and sources, including a new satellite system. It's a very devastating thing, as we talked about last night. And they're off running through Joe Biden's garage, Mike Pence's house in Mar-a-Lago. Is that a good prioritization, Bret Baier?
And maybe Catholic churches. We'll see.
Oh, yes. I forgot that.
So I think that there is a big question and priorities for the FBI. Some of the questions I asked the FBI director kind of led to that. I think that there are real questions about their priorities, something that the House oversight is really going to zero in on.
Well, Bret, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure to be with you. As I say, the most serious news program left in America is Special Report. You should watch every night at 6. Thank you, Bret, for joining me. Tune in. I have 7 broadcasts left on the West Coast before I return to the Beltway. We're going to be throwing into high gear on the presidential campaign, and so it's time to get back east. I have a question. I'm going to ask you this question, I think, every morning from now until whenever I retire, if I'm allowed to retire, as opposed to someone tapping me on the shoulder and saying, St. Peter is calling you. And you ought to always be aware that could happen to you today. But just focus for a moment on my question, or what I hope to begin every show from now until I go to the great airwaves in the sky. We are on the edge of a world crisis with the Chinese Communist Party, maybe a war. Are you ready for that? That applies to every business person, every consumer, every youngster who is considering what they're going to do with their lives. It applies to the world. It applies to the economic consequences of a conflict. A world crisis with China are immense. Are you ready for that? And so my goal is simply to tell you that every morning. Are you ready for that? I was on Special Report with Bret last night. Bret Baier. I was honored to be on with Brit Hume as always, and Jessica. I have not been on before, and we had a great time. But the topic came up. It began actually with President Macron has dispatched his economic and finance minister for cleanup on Aisle America because he so screwed the West with his quiet encouragement of Xi to invade Taiwan in the middle of Operation Joint Sword, which is the second such exercise, full-scale dress rehearsal invasion of Taiwan this week. Second one in 10 months. Macron goes over and says, not our problem. And so everyone, both the economists in Europe, all the European allies, and we really blew a gasket, although I don't know that Joe Biden knows about it, because he was in Ireland actually trying to talk about the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, and ended up talking about the Black and Tans, which is one of the most dreaded words in Irish history because they were the brutal British troops, mostly World War I veterans, that were dispatched to Ireland in 1920-21 and were very brutal extrajudicial killing. So the president was being the president yesterday, infirm and clueless. But Macron is in deep trouble. So he sends his economic minister to the United States, who goes on special report because he realizes the 5% of America that actually pays attention to national security, they watch special report. It's why Brit does that show, why I do that show. It's a serious show. So my turn comes around on what I thought the minister said to Bret, and I said this, cut number 2.
The interview, Hugh, with Emmanuel Macron gave with Politico in Europe is this, a quote, "The paradox would be that overcome with panic, we believe we are just America's followers. The question Europeans need to answer, is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the U.S. agenda and a Chinese overreaction." Thoughts?
It does not work. Brett, as Britt just noted, that was clean up on aisle America, what the minister was attempting to do, and he did it very inelegantly. You quoted the Wall Street Journal to him. He's been hammered everywhere. In The Economist, they called his move diplomatically dangerous and damaging to the credibility of his position and that of Europe's. And I would say the best winner here is General Secretary Xi. While Macron didn't give him a green light to invade Taiwan, it certainly wasn't a red light. And even the minister talking to you didn't say anything about, deterring violence against Taiwan, even as he encourages the West to rally around Ukraine. I thought that was a very ineffective attempt to resurrect some credibility for the French president. He didn't succeed with you because Macron failed so badly. That is the bottom line. Now, I'll come back to this. I'm going to talk about it every day. We are on the brink of a world crisis with China. They have told us what they're going to do. Are we ready? Are you ready? Have you done anything to think about what that looks like, what it does to I'll talk about it repeatedly for the next many, many years. And I hope it will never happen. But here's the Washington Times. China rehearsing for a Taiwan invasion and U.S. needs to act. The current joint sword exercise is the second major rehearsal for an invasion of Taiwan in the past 10 months. The first was the August 2022 PLA exercise again surrounding Taiwan. In both cases, China has used the excuse of independence forces on Taiwanese President Xi Ing-wen's meeting with the White House Speaker Kevin McCarthy as the impetus for these provocative acts. Still, that explanation is a cover for invasion exercises. It's coming. It's coming because if you're Xi, it has never looked so inviting. Now, on a related but not completely related front, the Washington Post has apparently found the leaker of the key documents before the FBI. The Wall Street Journal story is government looking for leaker in Ukraine documents probe. And I will read this whole thing for you. Washington Post. Leaker of U.S. secret documents worked on military base, friends say. The Discord leaks, the online group that received hundreds of pages of classified material, including foreigners, members tell the Post. The man behind a massive leak of the U.S. government secrets that is exposed spying on allies revealed the grim prospects for Ukraine's war with Russia and ignited diplomatic fires for the White House is a young, charismatic gun enthusiast who shared highly classified documents with a group of far-flung acquaintances searching for companionship amid isolation of the pandemic. United by their mutual love of guns, military gear, and God, the group of roughly 24, mostly men and boys, formed an invitation-only clubhouse in 2020 on Discord online platform popular with gamers. But they paid little attention last year when the man some called OG posted a message laden with strange acronyms and jargons. The words were unfamiliar and a few people read the long note, one of the members explained. But he revered OG, their elder leader of their tiny tribe, who claimed to know secrets that the government withheld from ordinary people. The younger member read OG's message closely, and hundreds more then said he was followed on a regular basis for months. They were, he recalled, what neared to be near verbatim transcripts of classified intelligence documents that the OG indicated he had brought home from his job on a, quote, military base, which the members declined to identify. OG claimed he spent at least some of his day inside a secure facility that prohibited cell phones and other electronic devices, which could be used to document the secret information housed on the government computer networks or spooling out from printers. He annotated on the hand-typed documents, the members said, translating arcane intel speak for the uninitiated, such as explaining no foreign meant information in the document was sensitive and it must not be shared with foreign nationals. All right, I don't know if that's a legend. I don't know if it's the real guy. I know the Washington Post has got a lot more done in their investigation than the FBI. I said to Bret last night when it came around on the disaster of the leak, cut number 3. Oh, cut number 3. It's very simply put, is that.
But the drip, Hugh, could be dangerous long term.
Oh, it's very bad. Representative Gallagher was on my program this morning, chairman of the China Select Committee. He said it's a disaster for the United States national security interests, and they've got to get into the Intelligence Committee to gather up the details of it. I think at a minimum, the FBI should stop wasting its resources on investigating documents at Mike Pence's house and Joe Biden's house and Donald Trump's house and start finding the people in the Pentagon who are compromising America's national security. There's a priority imbalance here.
A huge priority imbalance, an enormous one. We're on the brink of a world crisis. And you know what the other story is? Can I contrast it with another? That's a dead serious, we're going to war story, maybe. It's 1940, 1941. It's 1916, 1917. It's 1979, 1980. And there are serious stories and there are stories that are not. Here's a not serious story. Budweiser Clydesdale events canceled over security concerns amid Dylan Mulvaney backlash. I really don't care. Budweiser shot themselves in the foot because a bunch of their customers are not fans of Dylan Mulvaney, and that's a silly story. A serious story is China's second dress rehearsal of an invasion of Taiwan, and the FBI and special counsel Jack Smith running around trying to get Trump, and Alvin Bragg trying to get Trump. And we do not have seriousness in this country about what we're on the brink of. I mean, I was talking to a former national security advisor, Ambassador O'Brien, and I can tell you this, it's not classified. We did it on an open line. We have to start paying attention to what Xi Jinping says in Mandarin to his Chinese communist buddies about what they intend to do. And we are not ready. As you listen to Mike Gallagher yesterday in the town hall review this weekend, we're not even close to ready. No one's paying attention. We're following Dylan and Budweiser, and very, very frustrating. I have a lot more to say. Don't go anywhere, America. It's Thursday, and I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.
Right here was a hell of a rugby player, and they beat the hell out of black and tans. Oh, God, it was but it was when you were at a Soldier Field, wasn't it? The game? Chicago. And after it was all over, he gave my brother, allegedly for me, but if it wasn't, I still took it. I still got the tie. I wear it with great pride.
That's not what I was looking for, actually. He didn't say black and tans in that one. He just wandered around in that one. That's the music from Slow Horses, and it's a spy show on Apple TV. It's very good. Gary Oldman plays a decrepit, rundown Cold War spy who's still chasing the grasshoppers, or whatever they call them, the cicadas with a British accent. I'm just stunned to wake up. And, I do most of my show prep the night before. I did it early last night because I'm with Bret Baier, and then I did some more after Special Report was over. And then I watched a bit of All Quiet on the Western Front because I'm reading a lot about World War I in 1911 and 1914. And then I go to bed, right? And I get up, and the fetching Mrs. Hewitt is left me batching for a couple of days. So I get up early and go on and do my morning prep. And here the Washington Post has found the leaker of the Pentagon documents, which has done so much damage to us. I mean, a lot of damage to us. And the Washington Post found them, and the FBI didn't. Now, this could be a legend, right? This could be a total counterintelligence buffoonery, spy versus spy stuff. But they found a group of gamers or a group of COVID refugees, and one of them named OG uploaded documents to the server. No one talked about sharing them elsewhere, according to the Post. Then, unbeknownst to the group, on February 28th, another teenage user from the Thug Shaker Central server. By the way, did I not say we'd find millennials in this whole thing? Did I not say we'd find millennials and Gen Z who are unaware of anything that they do, the consequences that they do, the culture in which they have swum? They began posting several dozen photographs showing classified documents on another Discord server affiliated with the YouTuber Wowman. Some of the documents offered detailed assessment of Ukraine's defense capabilities and showed how far U.S. intelligence could see into Russia's military command. On March 4th, 10 documents appeared on Minecraft Earth Map, a Discord server focused on the popular video game. Is popular. The Artful Dodger, a.k.a. Flash, plays it. A user operating on the account he's 9, by the way, that the smaller tranche of images told the Post that they obtained them all from Wowman, who's not OG, who they originally suspected who's the gun enthusiast, which might all be a legend. Secret and top secret documents were now available to thousands of Discord users, but the leak won't come to the attention of U.S. authorities for another month. Meanwhile, OG stopped sharing images in the middle of March. On April 5, classified documents assessing the war in Ukraine were posted on Russian Telegram channels, and the message board platform 4chan began migrating them to Twitter. One image showed a March 1 Ukraine status update. It had been crudely doctored to inflate the number of Ukraine casualties and downplay those on the Russian side. So the Russians got a hold of whatever OG and Wowman were posting, wherever they were posting it from and whomever they are, and put it out in propaganda form. The next day, shortly before the New York Times first reported on the leak, OJ came into the server, quote, frantic, which is unusual for him, the member said. He said something had happened, and he prayed to God that this event would not happen, but now it's in God's hands. All right, I don't believe any of the legend. They're trying to make this guy into a right-wing crackpot. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I just think find out who it is, stop the leaks, go back and find what he got access to, and start firing everyone. And that man's going to jail. He needs a white-collar criminal defense lawyer. If he can afford it, you call up the best white-collar criminal defense lawyer in the country because you're going to jail. And you're going to jail because we have to send you to jail to make sure other bozos don't do this. You don't share. I'm so astonished by this. And in a time of world crisis, in a time when people are getting blown up and killed in Ukraine, we have deep domestic political rifts in the United States, and China is preparing to invade Taiwan. And there's no other way to call it that. This is a reality-based television show. 1-800-520-1234. If you have a comment on this, give me a call. It's astonishing to me that the Washington Post found the leakers, whatever their name and whatever their legend. I mean, you don't have to have been a spy or in the CIA or the NSA or the FBI. Understand this. This might all be fake and a head fake. But the Post found them before the Bureau. And maybe if the Bureau wasn't spending forever on documents in Joe Biden's garage and Mike Pence's garage and Mar-a-Lago's garage and chasing after the former president, maybe if they were looking for Chinese spies and morons on military bases. It's like Chelsea Manning 2.0. And I don't know that for sure. I'm just reading the Washington Post. If you're following me on Twitter, I posted the links to it and the Wall Street Journal story. And the obvious question is, how did the Post find the spy before the FBI did? How does that happen in any normal world? Maybe the FBI is just too old and too clueless about the online world. Maybe Christopher Wray should start saying we're shutting down this, and this, and we're focused on Chinese Communist Party espionage, and we're focused on spying. And morons in the government who are leaking things on the internet. Then we'll have some focus and purpose. 1-800-520-1234. That's what I wanted right there. Generalissimo came much earlier in the clip than I thought. Thank you for finding it. Joe Biden talking about rugby players in the black and tans. The black and tans were the British soldiers who went to Northern Ireland and were brutal and to Ireland. They also went to Southern Ireland in 1920-21. The black and tans were hated in Ireland. So Joe Biden goes back to the homeland and he's joking around about, he's trying to say the All Blacks, and who knows what he's talking about. But he brings up the black and tans. And everyone's polite to the old guy in the room. Everyone's polite. I am not polite about this leak and about the FBI. Bret Baier is joining me a little bit later on the show. I want to play again what I said last night to Bret on the special report show about the Pentagon leak. Cut number 3.
But the drip, 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 Hugh, could be dangerous long term.
Oh, it's very bad. Representative Gallagher was on my program this morning, chairman of the China Select Committee. He said it's a disaster for the United States national security interests, and they've got to get into the Intelligence Committee to gather up the details of it. I think at a minimum, the FBI should stop wasting its resources on investigating documents at Mike Pence's house and Joe Biden's house and Donald Trump's house and start finding the people in the Pentagon who are compromising America's national security. There's a priority imbalance here.
That is, to me, the most obvious thing. We have a priority imbalance. We got a lot of other news yesterday, but there's really only one story, which is China's getting ready to invade Taiwan. And they've run it twice. And as I said, I'm writing something for the Post, a long piece. And so I've been diving deep into World War I, especially 1911 and 1914, World Crisis by Winston Churchill. And the conceit of the piece is, what are we doing reading novels? Why are we watching Succession? Why are we clueless as to what is the world crisis that looms, not just in Ukraine, but the fact that Iran is doing the do-si-do with Saudi Arabia and now Syria involved, and China and Russia are together, and China has launched Joint Sword, which is the second dress rehearsal invasion. It's like we'd crossed the Straits of Normandy from the cliffs of Dover and made 2 feints at Normandy. Now, it's not quite that way because the Germans would have shot at us and we weren't going to tip our hand, but the Chinese are tipping their hand. You got to believe them when they tell you what they're doing. And I don't care about Dylan Mulvaney. I do care about leakers. There are 2 kinds of stories. Those stories that have something to do with the world crisis and everything else. And in everything else, they're political stories. And they're interesting. I mean, I'm going to run through them very quickly here. They're interesting, but they're not national security leaks or China. So they shouldn't be at the top of the news. That's it. U.S. inflation, quote, eased to 5% in March. Nice to believe that if you want. The core index went up 1/10 of a point from 5.3 to 5.4%. You got to hit us with another interest rate increase, Fed. And that's in the Wall Street Journal. U.S. inflation eased to 5%. Inflation cools notably, says the New York Times, but it's a long road back to normal. It's been like up 15% in the 30 months of Joe Biden since his election, and in the 26 months since he took office, and they spent all the money. And we're paying the price for that. We're paying the price for that. EPA lays out rules to turbocharge sales of electric cars and trucks. All right, this is going to fail the West Virginia versus EPA test by Chief Justice Roberts' own standards in the opinion. Agencies don't get to take old authorities to pursue their agendas. Their agenda, and the New York Times is very helpful here. They announce their agenda. Their agenda isn't really about limiting tailpipe emissions. Their agenda is to make the automobile makers make electronic vehicles. Electric vehicles, not electronic. They're already making electronic vehicles. Electric vehicles. That's what they're doing, and they can't do it. Former President Trump sued Michael Cohen for $500 million. Prince Harry is going to the coronation. I don't care. NPR quits Twitter over Elon Musk's government-funded label. I will miss Steve's Inskeep's tweets, but you know what? Government-funded is not wrong. Why are they objecting to that? They're objecting to that because they don't want you to focus on the fact that your tax dollars are going to a left-wing radio network, and it's a very good radio network. I have always said you cannot beat the quality of their shows. I love talking to them on the air when Nina Totenberg or Steve Inskeep or any of them have a great book. I have them on to talk about. They're just all lefties, and they're funded by the government. I'm not. I'm funded by ReliefFactor.com. Let me take it right now, as a matter of fact. This is the difference between NPR and me. I am willing to go out and find sponsors and test sponsors and discover sponsors and stay close to sponsors and do my thing with sponsors, because I think the market should decide what you hear on the radio. And I've been on the radio for 30 years, right? They opened it without scissors. I carried in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. All right, here it goes. I forgot to take it in the last segment, so I'm taking it right now. And I'm reminding you the weekend is coming. It's almost here. You can touch it. You can feel it. I also have to teach 2 classes today. And so I'll be on my feet a lot. But I'm feeling great. And I got to go down to Huntington Beach for the last trundle of the California interlude that I allow myself early in the year, because the fetching Miss Hugh, it's already decamped and has left me here. I've got 3 more classes to teach, got some exams to turn in, that sort of stuff. And ReliefFactor.com will power me through the next 2 weeks and through a long trundle at Huntington Beach or somewhere else. I don't know where. I might go up the hill. Who knows? But ReliefFactor.com works. And if you are feeling minor aches and pains right now anywhere, you had a bad night of sleep because your neck hurt or your shoulder hurt or take ReliefFactor.com. Try it for 3 weeks. See if it doesn't work for you. It works for a lot of people. Now, other stories that came up. All right, there's a great story on China's struggle over at Joby Warwick. Always read anything by Joby Warwick at the Washington Post, along with David Willman. China struggles with lab safety, carry risk of another pandemic. Oh, it's important to read it. Joby's got the details, and as does his colleague David, on we should be scared to heck. China doesn't care. They can spare the people. They let another gain of function virus out of another lab not named Wuhan lab for virology. Probably still have American funding in it somewhere. Gosh, we've been nuts. We've just been so stupid about China. In this piece I'm working on the Post, I just say, look, we're in a world crisis. And unlike in the United States in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell apart and we were the stupidest superpower in history, we declared a peace dividend. We helped everybody up. We did the Marshall Plan again for China. Only China were still Marxist-Leninists. And Xi comes along and all of a sudden they're threatening the world order just like Putin is. Because Bill Clinton was a lot of things, but a serious man on national security, he was not. Ross Perot running in 1992 and depriving us of George H.W. Bush and James Baker at that moment. But the world is what the world is. And I've been reading about 1914. Do you realize that the English liberal government in 1914, and it had some hawks in it, Sir Edward Grey, the Foreign Secretary, and most importantly, the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. A couple other hawks. Asquith kind of went back and forth. But the Liberal Party was pacifist or left-leaning, sort of like our liberal Republicans today were the liberal in Great Britain in 1914. And the cabinet had 18 members in it. And in July of 1914, when everybody's mobilizing and marching and getting ready for war, they won't authorize helping France. Right? They will not wake up. They are not sure we want to get involved in this one. It looks like they were clueless. And then Germany declared war on Russia, and they still wouldn't bite at mobilization. So Churchill did it on his own. He went and saw Asquith and said, I'm mobilizing the fleet. The fleet was ready, as KFK, Kirchner said. The fleet was ready. We are not ready for China, and I don't know what more people can do. Bret talks about it. I think serious people know. The Washington Times has a front page story. China rehearsing for Taiwan invasion. U.S. needs to act. Meanwhile, Ukraine needs South Korean artillery shells. There's a big story in the New York Times about Ukraine bloody stand for Bakhmut. Then we got a witness being asked about Trump's handling of a map with classified information. This is what makes me crazy. New York Times has a story by Maggie Heiberman, Adam Goldman, and Alan Fuhr about Donald Trump having a classified... Did he put it on the internet? Does anyone understand this? The documents at Mar-a-Lago and in Joe Biden's garage and in Mike Pence's house were not on the internet. The whole Jack Smith thing is stupid. A waste of time and resources and focus. Look at, study what the Chinese Communist Party is doing right now, because we are not ready. Government looking for leaker in Ukraine document probes. That's just so dumb.